The most frequent question I'm ever asked as a priest, it usually comes from parents who are struggling with their relationships with their adult children. And let me give you two examples because I think they exemplify a matter that perhaps we need to examine. The first would be, and perhaps this is common enough that you know of that same situation, where a mom and dad have a son living at home. He graduated college, can only find part-time work, and he's rather sulky and moody, stays in his room most of the time. And now they're planning on retiring, selling the home and moving somewhere else. And they wonder, how is that going to affect their son? And then we have the instance of a mother and a teenager, where the mother is chastising her daughter for her dress, and in that her selection of clothes, short shorts and bikini tops, and it cannot be resolved. Now the question is, how did we get to this situation in our families? And the only real explanation is that these relationships were too late in developing. Of all living creatures, there's none as vulnerable or slow in development as the human being. I mean, just observe a newborn completely helpless, a blank board on which is written the experiences of his life, many of which will predetermine his adulthood. Now I want you to consider this matter. I caught on the news just yesterday a news report and about a third grade teacher who wanting to know her students, asked them to write out what they would want her to know, what they would want the teacher to know about them. And here's some of the responses. One was, I wish my teacher knew sometimes my reading log is not signed because my mom is not around a lot. And another one wrote, I wish my teacher knew I didn't have a friend to play with. And another one wrote, I wish my teacher knew I didn't have pencils at home to do my homework. Now, I'm not going to assume that the parents were uncaring, but the issue here really is this. When a child tells this to his teacher, has he spoken to his parent about the matter? And if he hasn't, why? Now, I'm not going to rush to any judgment concerning these real-life situations. I think Jesus had the best way of dealing with this. He rarely directly moralized with any individuals, except if they were outrageous, or to generalize about the commandments if there was a kind of popular notion that was off track. But he would often just simply tell them stories, and these stories were called parables. I've counted explicitly about 28 of them in the Gospels, and many more were implicit stories. And he would use the stories because he realized, I can't tell people what to do, but hopefully they'll see the truth in the story I will tell them, and from that truth, help themselves to improve their relationship with others and with God. I'm going to go to the very first in all the Gospels parable that Jesus taught, and perhaps you're familiar with it. It's a parable about the sower and the seed. And if you recall, the sower went out to sow seed, and some seed fell on hard ground and couldn't germinate, and birds came and destroyed it. Another seed fell on rocky ground with very little soil. It did germinate, but after a while shriveled up for lack of moisture. And then another seed fell among fertile soil, but the soil was filled with weeds, and it did grow to a certain maturity, but couldn't bear any fruit. And then lastly, there was seed that was sown in good soil. And he said it yielded, some seed yielded 30-fold, 60-fold, 90-fold. Now, it's just a nice little story to have a lesson there. Well, I want you to consider this. If you were a gardener, would that be enough? Let's say you go out there and you have your garden and you got all this, and let's say all your soil is perfect. And you put in the soil, and at the end of the season, say 2-3 months later, you go out to make the harvest. What are you going to find? I think you're going to find a lot of weeds and infestation and bugs in your tomatoes. And the key here is this: like a good garden, children have to be attended to on a constant basis. And in time, you begin to enjoy the fruit that they bear in their lives. And that's something that gives you joy in your life. Now, for those instances where the parent is in the situation I just described with the graduate student who's out of work and they want to retire, or the mom who's arguing with her daughter that her dress is too risque, what is the primary issues here? The primary issue is, when that young man was a young boy, were there any discussions in the family? And I'm not talking about jobs, I'm talking about prestige. I'm talking about getting through this life in a sincere, holy way, and hopefully ending your life in a better world to come. And generally speaking, this would hinge on, and I'm quoting here from Aristotle, not just the Catholic Church, did the parent ever discuss with the child or exemplify with the child or point out to the child the important cardinal virtues that, cardinal meaning all other virtues, all other strengths hinge upon them? I'm talking about the virtue of prudence and temperance and justice and fortitude or bravery. And the fact is, there are situations in our life we know that if we employ these strengths, they will ultimately succeed. Gilbert Chesterton once said that nothing succeeds like failure. And I know for myself, whenever I think back on any of my failures, I start examining what happened. I've learned more from that than my successes. Successes you just, put away in the closet and figure, well, that's how things are. But until you fail, you do not understand really the complexity of our lives. I'm very grateful, for instance, that Thomas Edison, after 167 times, failed to invent the light bulb, tried one more time, and on the 168th time, he succeeded. We need to approach our lives with that kind of strength and fortitude, with that kind of prudence and justice. But for those who perhaps feel discouraged in the matter, because the fact is, we have no control over the freedom of anyone, including our own children. What are we to do? Well, you can become, even late in life, the great exemplar of what they should be. And in time, perhaps it would have a good effect. I think of Saint Monica, who married badly, married a heathen at the time, non-Christian, non-Catholic. Had a son, and he grew up in his early years to be a playboy. But in time, the steadfastness of her sanctity, of her good example, won the day, and both her husband and her son were converted. And to her we owe the great Saint Augustine, in the Catholic Church, one of the greatest doctors of the Church. What a sterling mind he had, all due to the persistence and holiness of his mother. And that is the one thing all mothers and fathers can do. Become the person God wants you to be. And my hope is that the others around you, particularly in your family, are influenced by what you accomplish, what the Lord asks of you.